Chapter 22, Buck Finds a Brother. Buck had earned $1,600 in 5 minutes. Thornton, Pete, and Hans could hardly believe their changed luck, for now they had the money to outfit themselves as gold seekers. They set off with Buck and 6 other dogs on the first leg of their journey, 70 miles up the Yukon. They traveled slowly in Indian fashion, hunting their food as they went. The sled carried mainly tools and ammunition. To Buck, the trip was an endless delight, just fishing, hunting, and wandering in strange places. Sometimes the men and dogs went hungry. Sometimes they feasted. It all depended on the fortunes of the hunt. When summer arrived, the men built rafts and pushed out across blue mountain lakes. They picked strawberries and enjoyed the flowers blooming in the shadow of glaciers. Fall, winter, and another spring passed before they came to a broad valley. There they found a stream that left a deposit of gold in the bottom of the washing pans. They didn't have to go any farther. They set up camp and got to work. Every day that they panned the little stream, they came up with thousands of dollars in nuggets and clean gold dust. Soon moose-hide bags, each holding 50 pounds of gold, were stacked like firewood, making a pile even taller than Buck. Except for an occasional hunting expedition for food with Thornton, Buck had nothing to do. More and more of his time was taken up by gazing into the fire. He saw visions of the hairy man and the flames. Sometimes the man was alert, sometimes he was fearful. Buck often saw him sleeping in a tree while Buck's ancestor, or was it Buck himself, kept a watch below. And then Buck would hear the strange call, the wolf's mournful song that seemed to be calling him. He would dash from camp and roam for hours looking for the source of that song, looking unsuccessfully. One night, Buck sprang out of camp after a deep sleep in which he heard the long, drawn-out howl. He ran for miles in the moonlight, then stopped suddenly. He proceeded with caution toward an open place among the trees. Looking out from the bushes, Buck saw a lean timber wolf, erect on his haunches, with his nose pointed to the sky. The wolf sensed Buck's presence. When Buck came out into the open, half crouching, his tail was straight and stiff. He gave an appearance of friendliness and, at the same time, a threat. The wolf fled at the sight of him. Buck pursued. Snarling, the wolf whirled about, but Buck did not attack. He only circled and made friendly advances. But the wolf was suspicious. At the first chance, he darted away, with Buck after him. Buck weighed 3 times as much as the wolf, and the wolf's head barely came to Buck's shoulder, so he could not understand why Buck held off attacking. At last, Buck's persistence was rewarded. The wolf halted. He allowed Buck to advance, and they sniffed noses. Then they became friendly and played. After a while, the wolf started off in a manner that plainly showed he had a goal in mind. It also made it clear that Buck was to come too. The two loped along easily, mile after mile through the woods. Buck felt wildly happy because he knew he was at last answering the call of the wild. He was running side by side with his brother toward the place from where the call surely came. He felt he had done this thing before, somewhere, sometime. They stopped by a stream to drink, and there, Buck remembered John Thornton. He sat down. The wolf started on again, but Buck did not follow. Confused, the wolf returned for him again and again, sniffing his nose and encouraging him to go on. But Buck turned and started running the opposite way. For almost an hour, the wolf ran with him back the way they had come, all the time whining softly. Then he sat down, pointed his nose upward, and howled. It was a mournful sound. As Buck ran steadily homeward, he heard the cry grow fainter and fainter until, at last, it was lost in the distance, lost in the trees. Chapter 23, Attack of the Yehats. For 2 days and 2 nights, Buck never left camp and never let John Thornton out of his sight. But then his restlessness came back. The urge to be part of life in the forest became greater than ever before, and Buck responded. He began to sleep in the woods at night. Often he would stay away for days at a time. He killed his meat as he traveled, and always he watched for signs of his wild brother. In the forest, Buck was a different animal from the romping one in camp. He became a creature of the wild, stealing along softly, cat-footed. He was like a passing shadow, moving so quickly that he could scoop a fish from an open pool. He even stalked an old moose, cut him off from his herd, and brought him down. The hunt took days, but Buck was tireless and persistent. Then he was ready to go home again. 3 miles from camp, he came upon a scent that disturbed him. He proceeded faster but more cautiously. Then his nose was jerked from the trail to the bushes. There he found Neg, dead, with an arrow embedded in his body. From the camp came a sing-song chant of many voices. Buck crept forward and saw Hans lying next to the bags of gold. His body was studded with arrows. Nearby, the Yehats, an Indian tribe, were dancing a victory dance around the fire. Rage came over Buck like rolls of thunder. He hurled himself out of the bushes onto the dancers. The Yehats heard a fearful roar. Like a hurricane, Buck struck down their chief, ripping his throat wide open. With the next bound, he had felled another Indian. Before the Yehats realized what was happening, Buck had killed 5 of them. They ran for their weapons and let loose a fury of arrows. But Buck's movements were so rapid and the Yehats were grouped so closely together that the arrows pierced the Indians themselves instead of the dog. As Buck continued his rampage without slowing down or missing his targets, the Yehats panicked. Shouting that the evil spirit was among them, the Indians scattered through the woods. Buck chased after them, pulling them down a man at a time. Finally, tiring of the pursuit, he ran back to camp. It was not until a week later that the Indians who survived were able to find one another in a lower valley. There, they counted their enormous losses. In camp, Buck found Pete dead in his blankets. But where was his beloved master? Buck picked up John Thornton's scent and followed it to a stream. On the bank, there was evidence of a fierce fight. Thornton's trail led into the water, but did not lead away. Buck understood what death was, and he knew that John Thornton was dead. All day, Buck sat by the stream or roamed restlessly around camp. There was a great emptiness in him, one that ached like hunger, but no food could fill it. At times, he stopped in his aimless prowling and looked at the bodies of the Yehats. For a moment, he would forget the pain of Thornton's death because a certain pride filled him. He had killed man, and man was game forbidden to beast. Chapter 24. Buck answers the call of the wild. Night came on with a full moon. Buck was mourning and brooding by the stream that held John Thornton's body. Suddenly he stood up, listening and scenting. From far away drifted a faint, sharp yelp, followed by a chorus of similar, sharp yelps. As the moments passed, the yelps grew closer and louder. Buck recognized them as the sounds he had heard in that other world, the world which he half saw, half dreamed in front of the fire. It was the call of the wild, and it was more wonderful and more compelling than ever before. And now, as never before, Buck was ready to answer it. John Thornton was dead. Buck's last tie with man was broken. The wolf pack had crossed over rivers and timberland into Buck's valley. Now, with the moonlight streaming down on them, they poured in a silvery flood into a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood Buck, motionless, waiting for them. The pack was awed for a moment at this immense, still creature. Then the boldest leaped straight at him. Like a flash, Buck struck. The wolf's neck was broken by a single charge. Buck waited again, motionless as before. 3 more wolves leaped for him, and one after the other they retreated with slashed throats or shoulders. Now the whole pack, almost as one, flung itself at Buck. But he turned on his hind legs from side to side, snapping and gashing. He was everywhere at once, whirling so fast that he presented an unbroken front of defense. Not a wolf could touch him. To prevent the pack from getting behind him, Buck was forced back bit by bit. He finally stood in a dry creek bed, backed against a deep bank the men had made in their mining. Here he stood at bay. With 3 sides protected, he faced the wolves and took on each enraged animal. After half an hour, Buck was still in command. The pack had drawn back, laying or standing in a ring around him, nursing their wounds. Then one wolf, long and lean and gray, advanced cautiously in a friendly manner. Buck's eyes lit up as he recognized his wild brother with whom he had run side by side for hours. The wolf whined softly, and so did Buck. They touched noses. After him came an old wolf, gaunt and scarred from fighting. He put his face forward. After a moment's hesitation, Buck touched noses with him also. At this, the old wolf sat down, pointed his nose at the moon, and broke out into the long wolf howl. The other wolves did the same. Buck, watching intently, felt his fur bristle. But this bristling was not from anger, but from the strangeness and mournfulness of the cry. He no longer held off, but sat down too and howled at the moon. This over, Buck came out of his protected place. The pack crowded around him, sniffing in a half-friendly, half-savage manner. Then the leaders yelped and sprang away into the woods. The pack fell in behind, yelping in chorus, and Buck ran with them, side by side with his wild brother, yelping as he ran. Chapter 25. The Ghost Dog. It was not many years before the Yeehats noticed a change in the breed of timber wolves. Some were seen with splashes of brown on their head and muzzle. Others had a strip of white running down the center of their chest. But even more remarkable than this, the Yeehats also tell of a ghost dog that runs at the head of a pack. They fear his great strength, but more than that, they fear his cunning. No matter how they try to protect themselves, the ghost dog robs their traps, steals from their camps, and kills their dogs. And from time to time, their hunters are found with throats slashed open and with wolf prints about them in the snow, prints larger than any wolf's ever seen. The Yeehats also fear a certain valley where, legend has it, an evil spirit lives. They never hunt there, and women of the tribe grow sad when the valley is mentioned. There is, however, one visitor to the valley who goes there every year, every summer. He looks like a wolf, and yet not like a wolf. He sits brooding and sad for a long while by a stream. Then he howls once, a long and mournful howl, and leaves. When the long winter nights come on, the ghost dog can be seen running at the head of a wolf pack through the pale moonlight. From time to time he raises his great head, and with the pack he sounds the call of the wild. We hope you have enjoyed this serialized novel. Please come back and visit the Bonham Public Library again. Thank you.